First of all, I'm going to say welcome to everybody. So welcome. Albert is off and away. Albert is off and away on conference travels, so he isn't here this week. So he's asked me just to fill the gap on intros. I can see we've got a couple of joiners online, so welcome to you as well. This week's speaker is well known to most of us, but is Lorna Devenish. So she's our partnerships manager and centre board systems. For those that haven't had the chance to meet her. Lorna and I met in about 2012 when I went along as the Suds drainage engineer. She came along as the kind of community manager, but at the time I think you were head of comms at South West Water. And we discussed with some communities how to get some sustainable drainage systems built in their local parks to the benefit the benefit of all. Bits and bobs got constructed at the end of that, but I think there's been lots of learning since 2012. And then Lorna and I also managed to work together in a later phase of what's the one after the noughties, the teenies, wherein we worked together, and Lorna was development manager at an organisation. We were working on real-time control systems for rainwater, and then in your most recent role, we've brought you back in to do partnership management activities. So just as a cue up, this is an FCRIP project, Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Project, funded by DEFRA. I'm going to go to that. You're going to cover it. I won't cover any more things. I'm just going to hand out these SWIG early career research poster competition, and I'll just get out of the way. Thanks, Lorna, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete, and hello everyone. This works. Here we are. Yes. Okay. Today I want to talk to you about the Resilient Together project, what it's striving to do, a little bit about me, not much, the storm of September 2024, and what I learned by interviewing emergency responders and what's happening as a result. This is about the Resilient Together project. It's a DEFRA-funded initiative. It's led by Central Bedfordshire Council in partnership with others, including Hertfordshire County Council, and that will come up later. It's one of 25 flood and coastal resilience innovation projects launched 4 years ago to develop the capacity and innovation in lead local flood authorities, which are local authorities, our local councils, who have some statutory responsibilities but not that much money and resources. So we're the academic partner, and we've led a lot working with my colleagues Mike and Pete, and Chris has done cameo work for us as well, on installing flow sensors, depth gauges, CCTV cameras and rain gauges, initially looking at the sort of project's ambition of developing a live modelling platform, but that's kind of evolved. And it's now probably one of the most intensively censored ordinary watercourses in the UK. And the question is, would that help them in a flood emergency? And this is a picture that Mike's very kindly made for me of the little stream that we are focused on. It's called the Pixbrook, and it's a 16-kilometre square catchment, and it's like every kind of like unloved, forgotten, ordinary stream that you will see in every local authority area across the country. Low flows in summer, then when it rains hard, it goes wild and floods everyone. So it's kind of got a bit of everything in the catchment, which is why it was chosen. Right, a little bit about me. I'm a trained journalist. I've got a couple of decades' experience in the water industry, which Pete touched on, and I'm now sort of working in the kind of research industry interface, you might say. Okay, so what happened last September? There were back-to-back storms across 8 days, and they broke the records for the central Bedfordshire area. And that pink and purple colour there equates to, at very top of the scale, 350% of the average annual rainfall amount. So what happened? It was the headwaters of the Great Ouse in central Bedfordshire. Embedded thunderstorms caused the rainfall to be both intense and prolonged. There were 2 major pulses of rainfall. There was significant surface water flooding of over 200 homes plus businesses and infrastructure. And 396% of monthly average rainfall fell, and the intensity was probably a really key part of it as well. 12.6 millimetres fell in just 15 minutes, and quite incredibly, the River Hiss at Arlesey rose to its highest ever maximum observed in 45 years of data, and that little red dot shows you how high it got compared with its normal range. So it was a big event, and the emergency response, that's a picture which the council doesn't really like me showing, so don't tell anyone. But actually this is really widely available on the internet, so they can't really stop me. But yeah, the brand new road underwater, 8 metres of water. It was a big event, and so the local, what happens in this sort of event, the local resilience forum convenes a multi-agency flood response, and they coordinate all the emergency services, the councils, the Environment Agency, the water company, and they also have trained volunteers who are called, there's a group called 4x4 responders, who are people who have like these large SUV vehicles, and they put them to good use in an emergency, which is not a reason to have one, but I guess they can be useful occasionally. And they also have community emergency response teams, those certs. So the council had a big job to do, right? It had to identify the vulnerable people affected by flooding, had to offer to evacuate them and find emergency accommodation. In practice, a lot of people just go to friends and family, but there will be some vulnerable people who can't do that. So they've got a big job to do, and there are teams within the department that are not the flood risk team who will be swinging into action within social services and other departments trying to make that happen. But, you know, were they prepared? It's arguable that they were a bit sceptical that these flood warnings were going to materialise. There had been 3 previous amber warnings for the area which hadn't come to pass, and I think that probably speaks to the difficulty of forecasting summer rainfall. The Met Office will tell you that's harder than winter rainfall. And the storm suddenly veered to the south, and much of it fell unexpectedly in the south of the catchment on the Pixbrook, as it happens. And the staff there, all agencies, operated a 24-hour emergency response team for 2 weeks, which stretched their resources absolutely to the maximum. I was asked to review the emergency response, and what I did was I interviewed 6 people involved in the emergency response and analysed their responses. And the hypothesis that we were kind of working from, that we were testing, amongst others, was could their response have been enhanced with better digital tools? So what did we find? I'm going to not go through all of these, but how the Pixbrook sensors helped. So here are the Pixbrook sensors. Here is the Pixbrook. The dots on the left show you where there are kind of like national level rain gauges and level gauges operated by the Environment Agency and the Met Office and others. And then that little box there, that's the Pixbrook catchment with its 15 level gauges and 2 rain gauges. And as you can see, it's quite concentrated on a little stream. And there they are. I've got some notes here to tell you about what these are. These are gauging stations in a box installed by Radio Data Networks, who are a company that is a partner in the project. They're designed for rapid, non-invasive installation. They're self-contained in a bulletproof stainless steel outer enclosure. They contain a Vega Pulse C11 or C21 radar battery and controller, telescopic brackets that enables installation on railings, bridges, so that reduces the need for advanced surveys, and it operates in areas where cellular coverage is not assured because they are supplied with Iridium satellite communications. So there we are, those kept working. The Environment Agencies, not so much. We've also got cameras. There's a reservoir on this stream that was constructed by the Internal Drainage Board. Serves very little purpose, but it has these incredibly over-engineered gates which don't move when you want them to, and sometimes do when you don't want them to. And anyway, we can see the levels from there. So that's the river flows, if you can see, from south to north. So that's quite early on in the catchment, as it's just after all that surface water runoff has come off Letchworth and entered the stream. It then goes via this reservoir and on up to the more northerly part, which is where it typically floods. And at that point where it typically floods, they've got a camera and a river level. So what did the sensors do? So this is a small stream. It took 90 minutes from start to finish for the water to pass through. What the flood risk manager did was she looked at various bits of information, including her dashboard that shows her the data from these sensors. Now, it wasn't as simple as it said. It wasn't telling her it's definitely going to flood here. It was not that straightforward. A kind of, oh yeah, that's great then. But she was able to deduce certain things. So she said, we're able to monitor the situation. They had been warned that it was high. So in another world where she didn't have sensors, she might send teams there. But she's got cameras, so she can have a look. And she say, well, hold off on the teams who are busy doing other stuff. And from experience of other flood events on this stream, she knew that there would be a second peak. So the question was whether it would be higher or lower than the first peak, and then how much the level at the more southerly parts of the catchment were after that second peak. So she's making a series of deductions, really. And what she said happened was the second peak was higher, and the brook then started to back up through the drains. But because they were monitoring it on a camera, they could see that if it didn't come out of bank on the second peak, it wasn't going to get any worse, because at that point the upstream levels were starting to fall. So she said there was some luck involved, but it also meant that in quite a short space of time, and you've got events moving very rapidly, they were able to move their focus elsewhere. That's not a problem. That one is not going to flood homes. So she knew the extent of the flooding on Pittsburgh. So that told her that this low-cost sensing had a real role to play in guiding the emergency response. Not necessarily the public warning system. Now, this project is set out to sort of produce a system that could potentially provide flood warnings for this brook. And I would say the project as a whole sort of moved away from that conclusion now. And the reason for that is the Environment Agency uses its main river sensor network to provide consistent, actionable information for the general public, and they do that to a better or less well degree, depending on your view. They need high levels of accuracy because people may act on the information. So if you're going to evacuate, you really want to be sure that it's right. There are also public liability risks, and the trust is vital. So can a council with some low-cost sensing put itself into that position? Maybe not, but they could use it differently to help guide their scarce resources. So the ordinary watercourses are often first to respond to rainfall. They rise and fall more quickly, and they need to know, will this road flood? Will this stream go out of bank? Which culverts, bridge structures should I check first? And how can we prevent residents from driving into floodwater? And I should say that they need this help. Scaling up to this emergency response was really difficult for them. The emergency planning manager told me that he had 3 team members. They're all part-time and they've all got caring responsibilities. So shifting that kind of team resourcing structure to a full-time 24/7 incident is really difficult. People still need to feed their families. So the other thing that really threw up was a slightly chaotic flood reporting system. The team had done lots of things right. They had a mega Excel spreadsheet. They had their emergency responses. They had their community WhatsApp groups, and everyone was chatting on MS Teams. But the problem was that they had so much information coming from so many different sources, 37 WhatsApp groups, and that information is not then captured in a usable way. So they ended up inputting everything into an Excel spreadsheet as fast as they could, but the problem was that everything was happening so fast that they couldn't really keep up. And also the information that was coming in from the public was often missing key information, like the postcode, where they were. So the emergency planner reflected that it would have been far better if they just had a form that people could fill out to let us know they're flooded. Sorry you're flooded, can you just fill in this form? And then in the end, that's what they started doing to an extent. But the job of the lead local flood authority is to capture the data and report it back to government. One of the things they need to be able to say with confidence is how many homes have flooded. And actually, DEFRA have just apparently radically increased the amount of data they expect local authorities to collect in a flood event. To this day, I would say the flood risk manager is not totally confident of that number of 200. And that was because information resided in lots of different places. They had a very small team to do it. The job of kind of collating all the flooding incident reports kind of fell on them. And then they were left with over 1,000 emails to reply to, and they were statutorily required to reply to these. But it took over a month, which is not very useful to the resident. So it was a pretty flawed data collection exercise, and I think, they would readily concede that. So I've called this Keeping Up with the Jones. Well, we were looking at the rainfall here in Exeter, and I spotted this tweet, or whatever you call a thing on X now. And we were quite impressed with this. This is Hertfordshire County Council, who are next door, who are our project partner. And they produced this heat map of where they were getting all their flood reports. And we thought, well, that looks quite serious, and that's also quite impressive that they're able to kind of put that out so quickly. And we discovered in this kind of wash-up process that they have much better ways of collecting data from their flood reporting system. So I'm going to whiz through this. How am I doing for time?
I think we're good for time.
Good for time, right. Okay, well, let's dive in here. So these bits in the black box here, they are what's on the CBC website. If you put in, flooded, what do I do? You get this page which says, don't blame us. Here's some other numbers you can call, or you can report a flooded road. But nowhere does it really say, report a flooded house. There's a lot of sort of self-triage by the resident required. Right. Is my flooding a highways problem? I mean, if you've got water in your house, I don't think you'd necessarily be like looking down this list of things I can report. And well below a parking problem, you've got eventually report and track. This circle's in the wrong place. I need to change that. But report and track roads and highways problems, and eventually that gets you to a place where you can report a flooded property. So you've gone through 3 pages now. Meanwhile, in Hertfordshire, they have a better reporting system. They have the same sort of information about who's responsible for what, but if it is their responsibility, they kind of hold their hand up and say, tell us. And then you're given a quite sensible list of options. Is it a drain? Is it a road? Is it a footway? Is it property? And so we asked Hertfordshire to come in and tell us what their process is, and they've given us some important details on their system, which is called Confirm, I think. One of the first things they've done is a flood incident questionnaire, so straight off. And it's not, I think it's quite critical to get this right. It needs to be the right amount of information, but not too much, so that you're collecting what you need to collect for your data reporting requirements, but not so much that people just give up and stop reporting. But, ideal if residents can upload photos and videos. And then they get this exported into a spreadsheet, and that's critical, really. Once you've got it in Excel, then you can manipulate that data, can't you? And you can count it and chop and change it and do what you need to do with it. So where does that leave our project? Well, we started with a live flood modelling platform, and we've with 2 years to go on the project, we've landed on a digital flood warden, which is not one platform, but a sort of suite of tools for local authorities. And what I wanted to focus on here is what I'm euphemistically calling the flood button, but that is basically how you report a flood. Mike and I was working on other parts of this, the smart catchment and so on. It would generate advice, it would create a heat map, and it would ensure responders have information about the hotspots. And this is all kind of live as we speak. We're in the process of scoping that, but it's safe to say that Central Bedfordshire Council are very interested. Now, this is obviously a case study. It's an example. It's a one-off. It's not, we can't say this is every council, but I think it's quite an interesting and apposite example. And I would venture to say that it's probably reflective of quite a few local authorities in this country. These output under our digital flood warden umbrella will be the tangible kind of digital tools that the Resilient Together project will deliver for this project. And our expectation is that we will be able to explain to the EA, other lead local flood authorities, and anyone who wants to listen, why we arrived at this, how this could help everyone, and why, in a way, we sort of veered away from that ambition of giving flood warnings to people and actually ended up with a better data collection process for local authorities. That's the end of my talk.
Okay, I'm conscious coffee has arrived, but I'm thinking what we might do is 10 minutes of Q&A. Sorry, I'm having a head rush. This always seems to happen.
Yeah.
Just put some blood back in. There we go, I'm back.
Do you want to bring the coffee in?
Should we do some questions and then we'll get some
Yeah.
coffee after a couple of questions and then we can move to more of a conversational format. So, I would open the floor to queries, comments and suggestions. Okay.
Is there any problems with people, the public, reporting flood to different people? So there are several organisations collecting information like this. I'd imagine that some people might phone up their local water utility like South West Water and then saying, my house is flooded, what do I do? And then being redirected from there. And is it reliable, that redirection to a single hub for collecting data? I mean, you said the flood risk manager, I think, of the area wasn't sure about that 200 homes being flooded. And is it possible that some homes have been got onto a different database somewhere else?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, the local authority reported that the only way they had of talking to the water company was to ring their public customer service line, and that took 45 minutes to get through.
And you can imagine what the water company are dealing with in the control room.
Yeah.
10,000 alarms going off.
Yeah.
And there's, one of the many local authorities making a phone call in the corner.
So if they persevered and get through to the water company and say, my house is flooded, they'll be asked whether it's flooded with sewage. They'll say, probably. And maybe they'll direct them back to the local authority, and maybe they'll capture it as a sewer flooding incident as well at the same time. That's what they've got to capture, isn't it? I mean, we've no way of knowing the counterfactual of how many people went elsewhere. But I think what we do know is that not everybody who rang the council, their not even
Their details were captured.
And that's,
Can I make an observation that will turn into a question?
yes.
I would observe that the lead local flood authorities are being required under Section 19 to report more often. So they've been given more roles, but maybe not the resources, in order to report after a flood. So they're now perhaps more incentivised than ever before to have an efficient mechanism in place to manage their resources as best they can to gather the data. But then at the same time, the Environment Agency's national level would love to have all of that information. And so in this project is resourcing the activity of innovation to try this, because it's funded by the Environment Agency, but on a day-to-day basis would not be pushing the local authority to do this. So the question is, at what level should it be local authorities gathering this information, or should it be a national tool?
It's got to be local authorities, hasn't it? And I think that's recognised by DEFRA actually increasing the amount of data they want them to collect. But unfortunately, they've increased the amount of data they want them to collect without increasing the resources that they've been given to do that. But what's interesting, isn't it, is that they're not currently using the digital tools at their disposal that could help them do it quite well. And having those two councils side by side, one doing it pretty well, one doing it, frankly, in a very chaotic way, shows how much scope there is really just to level up, to use a term, all the councils' ability to do this. And I think what will be quite interesting as we scope the flood button, apologies for my terminology there, but it's the most simple description I can think of, is to compare what the form that they will use to capture flooding incidents with what DEFRA now requires them to collect, which could potentially tip that balance between this is an easy thing to report, easy form to complete, into it's 52 tabs on a spreadsheet, and are you a historic building, and too much. Yeah. Striking the balance. Yeah. Other questions?
A flood warning, you said you've moved away from. We've got flood protection on the
yes.
there. Yes. Is that an aspiration? Is that somebody else doing that?
It is real. It is a real thing. And it's being led by JBA, who are consultants in a lot of the FCRIP projects. And I've got a picture, and I should have included it. They did do a kind of prediction of what would happen in this event, and they weren't spot on, but they weren't that far off. And there's a couple of ways in which we might be able to do forecasting. Actually, the RDN dashboard. So they've made a dashboard that is ingesting all the data from all those sensors on the Pix Brook. And actually, they've started doing something where they've now got bank heights in that, and then they've also got the river level information. So you can see that you can look at the RDN dashboard and see that it's getting pretty high close up. I mean, what it doesn't have, and this may foil it completely, is the width of the river at that point. Okay. so it's tricky. The forecasting tool, Mike might be able to speak a bit more about this, but I think it uses sort of thresholds and weather forecasts and some models.
Mike, what's the name of JBA's tool that they're using?
Self-use platform using a PDM model. Yeah.
And I'd make an observation. There our kind of single line ambition is get data. Okay, and so then we're into the zone of, is the data useful for writing a Section 19 report, which is the report the council have to write after a flood? And does it save them hundreds of hours of otherwise consultancy time? Does it help them understand the hydrology of their catchment so they can reject or approve future planning applications? There are lots of potential useful value bits, and we're into this piece of now stacking them up and finding out if one of them is the reason or if none of them are the reason. We have no flow sensing in the catchment at the moment, but the project, because it's an innovation project, has gone, no flow sensing, but lots of level data. A little bit of flow data would supplement all of our old level data. So they're buying a flow sensor now for the centre of the catchment, and that will help calibrate some of the depth data that they've already gathered. And so from that, it's a really positive project in that perspective. They kind of keep nibbling towards where they can get to. Got 2 years left, so we still can't quite see where we will arrive. And the original ambition, sorry to then take the floor, the original ambition was to have a live modelling platform, which would be an integration between the data coming out of the catchment and a hydraulic model running in real time and feeding back to the local folks, and recognising the catchment is only 16 kilometres squared. it's a tiny little test location where we kind of explore that with the partners. And JBA have done a good job on this Delfuse tool that does some prediction. But when we're looking for those events that are coming once every 20 years or 50 years, you know, you can almost guarantee we haven't got that data in our collection just yet. So we need to gather 10 years of data before the data gathering starts to become more useful in that domain, I think. Got lots of dry weather data. Other thoughts or questions? Or even suggestions, because it is one of these projects where, you know, this is the framing now, this is where we will end up on the kind of hand in, but there are still opportunities to shape what happens next year.
Is there issues about, I think you hinted at it, vulnerability within the catchment that could be captured here?
Sorry,
Could any of your data or your systems capture information about vulnerability, i.e. Could be vulnerable buildings, could be vulnerable people? Because a flood is a flood, but it depends who it floods, influences what the risk is.
yeah, I mean, a more sophisticated flood button could flag certain postcodes, couldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But yes, so that, I think Albert's team have done some things.
Yeah, that's
Your
right.
team's done it.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a methodology to apply potentially there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite
Mike, worth
interesting.
scribbling it down on your pad.
Another thing on the bottom.
I mean, to some extent, that's one of the problems in these projects, that you can list 50 possibles,
Yeah.
and then as a team you have to choose the 3 that are worth executing. But there are 3 other consultants. There's the people on the ground, there's the engagement officer, there's the local flood authority lead, there's many, many partners. And so whereas we, you know, from time to time we have ambition of doing a specific thing, but we can't articulate that to enough of the partners to get it mobilised. You know, so there's that constant communication.
A strong client that says, we want this.
Exactly. And yeah, we have a great project manager called Sharon at the moment who's been running a nice project for the last sort of 3 or 4 years.
Like those reservoir gates, doing something with them. I mean, we'd love to make that a bit smarter. But, time is running out.
Okay.
Sorry, I was late.
Go ahead. No, it's all right.
If you're running flood forecasting using Delfuse and the available river models, that would seem to be the same as the Environment Agency are running. What would be the advantage of running it separately as opposed to just picking up the results from the live forecasting that the Environment Agency is already doing?
I mean, so there's no Environment Agency sensing on a stream of this size. It's an ordinary
It's
water
not
course.
covered by there.
So they have 1,500 sensors on 200 main rivers.
I think once you get 2 miles downstream,
It's
then
two
you're into the main river
into
network.
the smaller.
But
Yeah.
RDN made the
That's a
point
huge
that they perhaps should be sensing these, because actually they're the kind of alert system.
Where floods happen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also all the EA sensors flooded out and didn't work.
So one result of this might be to show that extending the flood forecasting into the smaller river and stream network is a good idea.
Potentially, and also that the EA I think has a mindset, and you can totally understand. And I interviewed the EA emergency responder as well. She was very interesting to have her side of the story. You know, they have to have it of a certain standard in order to have that kind of faith in its ability to, you know, so that they. She said, when it's midnight and you're on your own in your house and you've got to issue a red level flood warning, it's a scary, lonely thing to be
It's
doing.
not responsibility.
Yeah, and so they really need sensors that they can rely on. Not that they could, but that are regularly maintained and calibrated and have a sort of higher standard and all the rest of it. So it's, I think, you know, we got the sense that the EA were a bit sniffy about our low cost sensors. I mean, they're not even the lowest cost sensors, are they? I mean, the RDM ones are actually some of the best of the bunch. But they were a bit sniffy about what they could offer, but their focus was very much on, warning the public. Whereas I think if you just shift it slightly and say, informing the emergency responders, so that they can then do the best job they can do, then you've got a slightly different framing. So.
Shall we take coffee? And if anyone has other questions, they're welcome to have it over a coffee or, But let's do a round of applause for Lorna at this stage. Thanks very much, Lorna, for that.